Today I'd like to give a sermon entitled, 7 Reminders About the Tongue. 7 Reminders About the Tongue. And my goal is to give positive ideas about this subject. If you turn over to James chapter 3, verse 1, the reason I want to be positive about it because I've said in the past, some of you have heard me say, that I think the tongue is the biggest problem in society, and the tongue is the biggest problem in the Church of God. There may be some others as big as, maybe I should say it that way, but the tongue is something that's something we cannot tame. And so thereby, if I turn to James 3 as we are, trying to show you the challenge we face, it's a pretty strong challenge. And so I don't want this to be a really strongly negative presentation. I mean, we can list example after example after example of the abuse of the tongue. If we were in private conversation, you could tell some of the things you've done right, and you could tell some of the things you've done wrong. And I'm really wanting it to be, since it's a big problem, I want to attack it, I want to deal with it, but I want to do it in a positive way to help you be more successful with it. James 3 verse 1 talks about why we have trouble in our congregation getting people to speak. It's a good problem. James 3 verse 1 says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment." See, I think it's a healthy thing that we don't have people banging on the door to speak, to try to cram information down your throat. Those aren't the kind of speakers I'm looking for anyway when I make the assignments. But the reason why a lot of people want to take their time, they don't want to get up here too often, or some fellows don't want to get up here at all, is because they understand the accountability that comes with this. So I think that's a positive thing. I mean, can be a challenge for me at times to try to make the schedule and get fellows to go ahead and speak. But if we give them enough time and they feel more comfortable with it, more prayer time, more study time, more preparation time, then we're happy that they share some of their thoughts and their ideas. But it is true that there's a greater accountability. And so again, the more words you say, the more you're held accountable to, whether it be in a teaching situation or whether it be in personal conversation. I won't read the rest of verses 1 through 8. It talks about, again, the tongue. The tongue is a very powerful thing. A little bit in the mouth can control the horse. A little rudder on a ship can control a ship. The tongue is a little member, but a little spark in a forest can have a forest fire raging, as in California and in the western states. The tongue is a fire, and who can tame it? The point is, really, it's very difficult to tame. So that's why I call it, in fact, it says it's impossible to tame it. It says the tongue, no man can tame the tongue. But again, it's a challenge, but because it's a challenge, I want to spend some time giving you 7 points to help you think about it, to help you be successful. The first one first point is a change of heart. A change of heart. Let's look at Matthew chapter 12, verses 34 and 35. When I've given this kind of sermon before, a lot of times I only have 2 points, and that's really more ideal, actually, because if you only have 2 points, you can take your time describing it, you can take your time adding examples to it, and this time it got out of hand a little bit, so it just means I have to go a little faster and make sure I pick the points I want to say in my allotted time period. But when I've given 2 points before, the first 2 points are the 2 points I've used, but in different order. The second point we're going to look at in a minute is guard your words. Guard your words. When I've given this sermon before, giving these 2 points of the 7, I've usually started with guard your words, which we're going to cover in a minute, and I've usually ended with a change of heart. And for the first time in talking about the tongue and talking about these 2 points, I've reversed the order. To me, the change of heart is the most important part of the tongue. And that's usually why I've ended with it. I usually in the past have given some good examples and then ended with the most important point. But today I'm doing something a little different. I'm starting with the most important point. If we want to have success with the tongue, the most important thing is a changed heart. In Matthew 12, verses 34 and 35. I've got to find it here. He said, "You brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things. An evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil things. The main point is what we say is really an indication of who we are. It's really an indication of our inner side, our inner life, our inner characteristics, our inner traits. And so while you see, if we want to really control the tongue, if we want to really do better with the tongue, we have to have a change on the inside. Of course, that's what should happen at baptism. That should happen at repentance. That should happen of people reaching out to God and building a relationship with God on an ongoing basis. But the very first thing we need to do, is have a change of heart. So I'd like to ask you to consider your life. I'd like to ask you to think about your life. I'd like to ask you to think about what kind of wrath is in your life, what kind of anger, what kind of bitterness, what kind of pressures. Because if those things are floating around your heart, in your life, in your inner being, in your mind, your thoughts, there'll be no surprise then that we say the wrong things. And as we heard about joy, and of course we can think about peace as well, we want that in our life. And of course the relationship with God, the connection with God makes that happen. So if we really want to change our behavior, hopefully we can get that better connected with God. And hopefully you'll consider having a changed heart because of your relationship with God. The second point is to guard your words. And from there, I'd like to read a psalm, Psalm 141, verse 3. Psalm 141, verse 3. This is something you can do on a regular basis. This is something you can do in your daily prayer. If you pray 3 times a day, you can do it. You can make this comment 3 times a day. If you pray 8 times a day with little short snippet prayers, this is a prayer that can be regular in there. This is a good thing. As I said, normally I've done this as the first point, but I'm doing this as the second point, following up the point of the change heart is guard your words. Look at Psalm 141, verse 3. David says, O Lord, set a guard over my mouth. The King James says, set a watch on our mouth. You can think of the hymn. You can think of the hymn that we sing. That's one of the words we sing. The New King James says, set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips. Okay, if we have the inner being changing first, step 1, then the second part is we can consider using self-control and asking God to give us self-control. It's really wonderful when you see people. I do it occasionally, you do it occasionally. We need to do it more than occasionally. But it's really nice when we start saying something and we stop. You ever catch yourself doing that? You ever watch some of your friends do that? They'll say, well, I was going to tell you, maybe I better not say that. That's a good thing. That's almost like, whoa. Don't say that. You thought it, you almost came out. Maybe in the past you would have said it, but now you're getting to a point, you're catching it before it comes out. Set a guard over our mouth. And that's a good prayer, asking God to help you with that. And then I have on the handout a whole list of proverbs about how we should refrain our lips, we should hold our peace, we should study to answer, we should spare our words, we should shut our lips, we should not answer a matter before we hear it. You don't make a decision until you have the evidence, until you have the information. We want to keep our tongue. We don't want to utter everything on our mind. We do not want to be hasty in words. So the first point was a change of heart. The second point was guard your words. The third point I'd like to talk about is speak the truth in love. Speak the truth in love. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 32 and 33. Because many of us want to speak the truth. Some of us are shy. Some of us are more outgoing. We have different personality types. Some of us like to view ourselves as speaking truth. We want to speak truth. And that's a good trait, to speak truth. In fact, most of the people in my circle want to speak truth. We want to say what's true. But we don't always have to say everything we know. We don't always have to speak every truthful thing we know. Just because it's true doesn't mean we have to say it. So sometimes speaking the truth in love means not saying it at all. Other times speaking the truth in love means What is the best way to say it that reaches the ear? We talked about this somewhat in the interactive study. We only talked a little sliver in the interactive study. And I did a little role playing with Dixon Cartwright. The reason I did a little role playing is because I knew he could take anything I'd say. And actually, I made myself out as the bad guy because I didn't want him to be the bad guy. But as I mentioned in the interactive study, think about us as people. We are consciousness in a body. When you think about the creation of God, we are consciousness in a body. Now, when I try to communicate with you one-on-one, or it's even harder, one on this audience and on the internet, it's even harder, because no matter what words I say, you're all going to receive it based on your experience. You're going to receive it based on your heredity. You're going to receive it based on your environment. I have an article in Edifying the Body, talking about what happened recently in the United States in the Supreme Court discussion. Many people who have been abused sexually, or many people who have been abused physically, it's easy for them then to look at someone who's been accused of that, and they can make a connection then that this happened to them, so then they will automatically paint the person who's being accused without evidence, being accused as, you did it, you're a bad person. And the article is about that by a lady from California. She writes a lot of articles, but I picked her article for Edifying the Body because it shows how it's easy to do. All of us can do it. Not just women do it, men do it as well. All of us do it. We have our real life experiences, and then we connect our real life experiences with a mirage, an accusation, may end up being true, may not be true. It hasn't been proven whether it was true or not. But what the person experienced was true. What they experienced was real. And instead of waiting for true justice to come, they then make assumptions. And of course, what the article says, sometimes it turns into revenge. I'm going to get revenge on you because someone did it to me. And that happened to me a long time ago, back when the church, we call church quake, when the church we were in kind of had a little falling out and different congregations formed. And I went to different, I was traveling back then as I do now. And it was real interesting. I went to one place. I've told the story before. I'll tell it again. I went to one place, and this was in 96. We had, this congregation formed in 95, it was 96. I went to a congregation, and the audience was really mad. They were very angry, and they were very rude to me. They were very rude. And it was a learning experience for me, because back at that point, I was waiting for the host of the congregation to stand up and say, he's a guest speaker, we invited him, we're not going to treat him this way. And I kept waiting for that to happen. It never did. But I came away from that experience as, I'm a big boy. I'm never going to expect the host congregation to protect me. I can take care of myself. If they're rude to me, I have to handle it right, the correct way. I will not respond rudely to them. I can't control them. All I can do is control my reaction. So it was actually a learning experience. I told my friend Kevin McMillan this, and he said, I'm glad it happened to you, meaning it was a good learning experience for me. I was in the real world. I had previously been in a church where you could never challenge the clergy. If you challenged the clergy, you were in trouble. Then I went to the real world where I get challenged by everybody. And that's where I feel today is I have to deal with anything that comes up. I can't, who's going to protect me? Who's going to take care of me? Whine, whine, whine. I have to be a big boy and handle myself as a Christian man and handle myself and deal with it, deal with people's dealing. But they were mad at me. I didn't do anything to those people, but they felt someone else did something to them, and they were projecting their anger toward me. And I happened to be innocent of that one. There are times I'm not innocent, but I was innocent of that one. And so it was just an experience where people will do that. So you just can't let your past experiences cause you to be negative toward everybody. You cannot think everyone else is guilty. You cannot jump the gun and just start criticizing someone else ahead of time. You're sorry for the people who've been abused. But on the other hand, I wasn't the one who abused them. I never had met them before, and I had to deal with that. But here in 1 Corinthians 10, verses 32 and 33. When I say speak the truth in love, I want you to remember this. I'm at 2 Corinthians, that doesn't work. 1 Corinthians 10, verses 32 and 33, talks about here, give no offense. In other words, our goal is to not to offend. We know some things Jesus did offended people. Some things God did offended people, so you can't eliminate all offense. But your goal is to do the things correctly, that if they get offended, the offense is on them. The offense is on their delicacy. Their offense is on them being a snowflake, not because we stirred up the offense. Because if people get offended at God and Christ, they're also going to get offended at you and me. Now, of course, God and Christ are perfect, where you and I need to work really hard not to cause people to be offended. But notice who we shouldn't offend. In fact, I gave a sermon on this. I loved giving it. I may take it out as one of my guest sermons. Give no offense to the Jews. Give no offense to the Greeks. Give no offense to the church of God. So again, you have to consider your audience. You consider, okay, the Jewish audience, the Greek audience, and the church of God audience. Someone says, well, I don't care about, I just don't want to offend the church of God. Well, what about the Jews and Greeks? Paul was saying, try not to offend anyone. Do your best. Be wise, be smart. So I say, when you speak the truth, you speak the truth in love. How will these words love the Jewish people? How will these words love the Greeks? How will these words love the church of God? So again, with the tongue, we're going to seek to speak the truth in love. The fourth point I'd like to mention, and I'm going to say it two ways. Speak to other people as you would like to be spoken to, and speak about other people as you would like to be spoken about. And I'm not going to turn there, but the golden rule from Matthew 7:12, Matthew 7:12 is the golden rule. You treat others as you'd like to be treated. If we would do that, our speaking would be a lot better. Our use of a tongue would be a lot better. If you don't want people to talk bad about you, don't talk bad about them. If you're concerned about how you want people to talk to you, if you want people to talk to you with courtesy and kindness, you talk to people with courtesy and kindness. That's the golden rule. That's what they call the golden rule. In other words, we treat others as we'd like to be treated. But I'm not going to turn to Matthew 7:12. You can write it down on the internet. But the next point is taking it a step further. The fourth point is good, but the fifth point is better. The fifth point is speak to other people as they would like to be spoken to, and speak about other people as they would like to be spoken about. Go to 1 Corinthians 9. We'll just turn over a page. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 19. See, in fact, I remind you, whenever we talk about pre-marriage counseling, I usually give a book entitled The Love Languages. It's a very basic book. It's been around for a long time. It's really one of the most basic books you can have in your library to find out what kind of love language you are. How do you like to receive love? And then also, when you're getting married, then you want to find out the one you're marrying, how do they like to receive love? See, because what happens, what a lot of people do, they want to give love the way they like to receive love. And that's really not kind. That's the golden rule, but it goes better than the golden rule. This point about talking about to others and talking about others as you'd like to be is more thinking about them. In other words, my love language is different than my wife's. And I know the book talks about 5 different love languages. My wife's is different than mine. If I tried to love her only as the predominant way I like to receive love, that's not cool. That's not complete. If I want to serve my wife, I know what her love language is and says, this is the way she likes to receive love, so I want to give her love that way. Then you have 2 sons, like we have 2 sons, and they have their love language. And so do I treat them the same? Do I give them the same love style as I give my wife? No, I try to look at their love language. And quite frankly, I try to do that with you. I try to do that with you. If I know what your love language is, I will try to deal with you in that way because that's the way you will feel love. So if I can help you feel love, then that's better than just having a good heart. If I just try to love you, that's a good heart. If I try to love you according to your love language, that's an effective heart. That's an effective way to help somebody. In fact, many times I'll sit in marriage counseling, and afterwards I'll tell the man, I said, your wife likes, I'll pick a flower. Roses are easy, but that might be, your wife likes a certain flower, and I'll say what the flower is. And they'll say, how do you know? I said, I was listening. I was listening to what flower your wife likes. And you're married to her, you better know what kind of flower she likes. I mean, it's sad if I don't know your wife nearly as well as you do, but I know what kind of flower she likes. I even know, I know what kind of movie your wife likes. Well, we always go to John Wayne movies. Yeah, but your wife doesn't want John Wayne movies. Well, how do you know? I was listening. I was paying attention. You got to love her like she likes. And one thing we used to do, and my wife had a real tough time with this. We go out for Mexican food most of the time as a family. So most of you would assume that I like Mexican food. Wrong. I don't like Mexican food. But you'd say, well, when you go out with your family, that's all you eat. Well, that's because my wife eats it. In fact, when I went out with Paula and your mom, Chewy's, wasn't it? And she took us out to eat one time. Just me. I don't think my wife was there. And we went out, and I asked Paula. She helped me order, and I keep asking to this day, what did I order? Because that was pretty good stuff. I have no idea what it is, but I have to write it down because I liked it. That was pretty good. But see, when we first got married, my wife would say, because she didn't want to be greedy, going out to Mexican food all the time, she said, let's go out where you want to go out to eat. Let's go to a steakhouse. Let's go where you want to eat. I say, honey, if we're doing it for me, we're staying at home eating your cooking. And she'd say, but we're going out to eat. We should go where you want to eat. Honey, if this is for me, we're going to stay at home eating your cooking. It took her a while because she's such a giving, kind person. It took her a while. Finally, she realized going out to eat was totally for her. So finally, we always go Mexican food. And so when you see me going Mexican food, I've never learned to like it, but I do that for my wife, and I'm happy to do it for my wife because, that's her love language. I could say, well, honey, my wife doesn't like this food, so I'm going to force her to eat this food. But she wants trying to be kind to me. She goes, what food do you like? Yours? And she goes, well, I really like you taking me out to eat. So that's good. Then we'll go Mexican food then. It was a win-win all the way around. But love language is figuring what people like. So again, how does that person like to be talked about? See, some people are thick-skinned. Okay, you can talk about Dixon Cartwright, and you just can't hurt his feelings. Can't do it. Many people have tried. You can't do it. Some of you in this audience, man, if someone talks about you, we might have a problem. We might have an emotional meltdown. That's okay. It's just difference of people. So again, I can't treat all of you like I could treat Dixon Cartwright. That would not be fine to you. That would not be fair to you. I have to know, okay, what do you like? So again, when you talk about people or talk to people, you have to consider, some people are really hard-headed, and some people are really tough-skinned. Some people are really whatever, or they just, because of their lifestyle, have been able to process things differently. You can talk to them differently. And by the way, you can be fooled. I've been fooled. I won't give you examples, but there's one of my friends who I hurt his feelings one time. We got talking about it. And I apologized. We talked about it. And I would have never guessed that I could have hurt his feelings, but I did. And I apologized when I knew I did. And unfortunately, he didn't tell me for 6 months. And I told him, I said, the Bible says to not let the sun go down in your wrath. I wish you had told me this the next day or the next day or 3 days later or at least the same week. I said, quite frankly, because he told me 6 months later, I couldn't remember all the details. It's like if someone told me the next day, I could remember all the details. That's why the Bible says, talk quickly, don't let something build. But we worked it out. And we're good buddies today. But I misread his love language, and now I don't misread his love language, because with friends we can do that. See, 1 Corinthians 9, verses 19 through 23, I love this section of Scripture. I love to do this as an interactive Bible study. We do this a lot when I travel, because it's one thing to treat people like you want to be treated, but now this is better. For though I'm free from all men, I've made myself a servant to all that I might win the more. You have to get in each other's shoes. You have to understand where they're coming from, which means listening. Bruce Graham was talking in there in the interactive study about he's actually going to a study group with some Jehovah's Witnesses, which has been a good experience for him, because he gets to get in there and he gets to use patience to hear what they have to say, use his moments to decide when he's going to discuss what he wants to discuss or challenge with or whatever. But it's really a good experience for him. And he's not being swayed by their doctrines. The doctrines that they have in common, he agrees with. He loves the doctrines they have in common. The doctrines they don't have in common, well, he has to decide how it can go well for years, or it can turn badly quickly. If it gets into a debate match, he may say, "Nah, this isn't worth my time." But I'm happy he did it, actually. And the reason I'm mentioning it is I think it's a good example of not to be afraid of what you believe, and to talk to people of different religion or different political persuasion, and to listen and try to work through the things together. And sometimes you can keep those relationships despite the differences. But again, Paul said, "To the Jew I became a Jew, that I might win the Jews." Well, I had a good experience in Prescott Valley. I met a lady who she's 71, and she's from New York City. I could tell. I couldn't. There was a time when I lived up there. I could tell the difference between the accents of the different boroughs. I could say, "You're from the Bronx. You're from Manhattan. You're from Brooklyn." That's a long time ago, because I could hear it. Now I hear it. I say, New York City, but I don't know which borough. I think she's from Brooklyn. I can't remember now. She just told me. But she's came to accept Christ 2 years ago. So 69 years as a Jewish person. And I took her name and number, and she's going to be one of my resources when I have questions about Jewish whatever, Jewish history, Jewish tradition, and very, very knowledgeable. In fact, one thing I told her was interesting. Years ago, when I went to a college, they told us how marriage should be, using the Ephesians 5 model. And the Ephesians 5 model about the husband loving the wife and the wife submitting. And my theory is, and I told you before, you all don't have to agree on the Ephesians 5 model. You can have slight variations. But the person you're married to, you should be in agreement with. Now, that doesn't always happen, but in an ideal situation, you should have an agreement with your mate on the Ephesians 5 model. Because I came away from the college, and I was telling people for years, when I grew up in the Northeast, I grew up around a lot of Italian families. And a lot of the Italian families, Mama ran the show. But when Papa put his foot down, she did what Papa said. So for me to try to cram every marriage into, you have to be a real docile woman, I grew up around a lot of strong women. Well, my Jewish friend I just met, she was telling me, and it should have hit me, I grew up around a lot of Italian and Jewish families. That's who I grew up around. And she said, in our Jewish family, the wife was the head of the house, and the husband was the head of outside the house. He made the money, he took care of the money, but inside the house, I determined what happened inside the house. And she was pretty typical, strong Jewish woman. And so we had a long talk, and I said, yes, it wasn't just the Italian families that I grew up around, it was also the Jewish families I grew up around. But the point is, she has a lot of wealth of information for me, because not all Jewish people are the same, obviously. There's different branches of religion. Of course, she's Church of God now. But if I have a question about how to deal with a Jewish person, I will call her up and say, can you give me some background on that? What's some of the history on that? What's some of the history of the marriages? What's some of the history of this or that? And she gave me, I asked her some of the history of the tassels and things, and she gave me a lot of that history. So again, she's a good resource. Another one now in my pool of people, when I want to learn about certain things, I call people who have had that experience. But how about you? Do you know how to deal with a Jewish person? Do you know how to deal with someone who's under the law? Yeah, you're probably pretty good at that. Do you know how to deal with those who are without the law? You're probably not as good at that, because you're probably pretty quick to point out your favorite aspect of the law and maybe pound that on someone's nose. But you see, if you're dealing with someone who's not around the law, if you're just pounding that on the nose may not be the most effective way to help those people. It may not be the best thing to do. How about, do you know how to be around someone who's weak? Now, by the way, when you're around someone who's weak, that doesn't mean, are you good around an alcoholic? Now, if you're helping an alcoholic, you don't want to be doing their sin. You don't want to be drinking to excess with them. If you're dealing with someone who's trying to battle drugs, you don't take the drugs with them. Obviously, you got that point. But are you able to do it? A lot of religious people don't know how to help the weak, because a lot of religious people view themselves as high and mighty. A lot of religious people want to just push God and Christ down people's throat instead of listening and maybe then offering some of the beautiful tenets of the Bible to help people. You know who are really good at helping people like that? Those teenagers. Those teenagers are around people who think all sorts of different things. As I tell a lot of you, especially if you're retired, unless you have grandchildren that you're dealing with doing some of those things, or children doing some of those things, your life's in a cocoon. You go to church on the Sabbath, you know when sundown is, you have your routine, you do your thing, getting off for the feast. If you're retired, you work it out, you have no problem. Now, the people who are immersed in society, not in the culture of society, but immersed in trying to live within it and try to be a light, boys, it's tougher that way. And so thereby, there are some in this room here who are very good at dealing with the weak. If someone had a problem, you'd be right there. I'm going to say something nice about Mr. Botha. The other day, Leslie Haroff sent me, it was before the feast, Leslie Haroff sent me a Facebook snapshot to me, because someone had a flat tire, and on the way home, the Botha saw the flat tire, and here this man who's a little bit over 23, being polite, Mr. Botha, he's listening in, but he got out and changed the tire. I think he was still in his suit. Changed the tire, and someone put it on Facebook about this man who, from South Africa, who changed the tire for me. And you say, well, that's not any big deal. That's helping the weak. That person didn't want to change the tire. And at his age and his experience, he wanted to change that tire for them. And I think that young lady has made the statement that when she finds out he's speaking, she may come to church to hear him speak, which would be a nice thing. But we're going to tell stories all about you like that. Some of you are really good at helping the weak. That's my toughest job, brethren, is helping the weak, people going through weak times. It's hard because there's no easy answer. I'm willing to try, but there's no easy answers. Changing a tire, I can do that. But helping people through a divorce, helping people through a really emotional trials that are huge, family situations that are unbearable, those are tough. But we try. You and I try because we want to say the right words to help them. So we can't just get locked into a certain answer. You've got to say the words that suit the situation to help the situation. So the fifth point was to speak to other people as they would like to be spoken to, and to speak about other people as they would like to be spoken about. The sixth one, there's a time for boldness and a time for tenderness. A time for boldness and a time for tenderness. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 and 2. There are people in the church of God who need to be more tender. They're really quick to be bold. They're very quick to correct people. They're very quick to tell them about different doctrines. And there are some people in the church of God who need to use the time for boldness. There is a time for boldness. There is a time for that. But I would recommend that you start with tenderness. That's what it says here, 2 Corinthians 10, verses 1 and 2. Please start with boldness. When I've said this before, I made an exception like to the teachers, to Reg and to Ron and all your teachers. You can't start out too weak. You start out too weak, that classroom will eat you up, right, fellas? You can't start out too weak. So maybe as a teacher, you start out a little stronger, and then as the class is responding, you loosen up. And here's what I say. When you deal with an unconverted audience, and when you deal with an audience that isn't geared toward God's way, you may have to start stronger with them. But if you're dealing with an audience that's godly, meaning like your wife or your husband, hopefully your wife and husband are real godly. So you should start out gentle with them and only go with boldness if necessary. And even there, you have to be very careful what kind of boldness you would use. But if you've got a good marriage, you should be able to start out gentle. I, Paul, beseech myself, I'm pleading with you, by the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who in presence am lowly among you, but being absent I'm bold toward you. I beg you that when I'm present with you, that I may not be bold without confidence, which I intend to be bold toward you. So Paul said, please, church in Corinth, Corinthians, I want to be gentle with you. If I have to be bold with you, I will be bold with you, but I want to be gentle with you. And brethren, that would be what I would advise all of you in this life, to be as gentle as possible with people in your words. And if you have to be bold, be bold. And maybe there's times if it's not worth being bold about, depending on the situation. The last one, I wanted to mention, there's a difference between Matthew 18:15 and Galatians 6:1. Matthew 18:15 is if someone trespasses against you. Galatians 6:1 says if you see someone with a fault. They're not exactly the same, but they're both valuable, and they're similar, but they're not exactly. A lot of times people will say, is this a Matthew 18:15? Like with me, they'll say, is this a Matthew 18:15? I said, no, you didn't sin against me. You didn't trespass against me, but I see you overtaken in a fault, and because I see you overtaken in a fault, I'm going to apply Galatians 6:1. So Matthew 18:15 is if something's against you. Galatians 6:1 is if it's against someone else or internal. By the way, I'll make this statement I've made before. I have seen Matthew 18:15 work lots of times. When you go to your brother, you say, how do you know? When they work, you never hear about it. When it works, you never hear about it. If Bruce Graham has something against me or I have something against him and we talk about it, we get squared away, you may never hear about it. Matthew 18:15 works a lot. Matthew 18:16 doesn't work as well, even though it's worth trying. And Matthew 18:17, I've rarely seen work in the Church of God. That's my experience. I know our friend Terry Post down in South Texas, he has seen Matthew 18:17 work. He just told me some examples. It's been very rare that it works. But Matthew 18:15 about going and talking to the person, trying to win them back, can work. You just don't hear about it. The last point, there's a time to keep quiet. I'd like to conclude in Amos chapter 5, verses 12 and 13. Amos chapter 5, verses 12 and 13. I've used this verse before, and I probably will use it as a sermon all by itself. But I do want to mention it here. Amos 5, verses 12 and 13, if I can find it there. So we've talked about the tongue. We've talked about we need a change of heart. We talked about we need to ask God to guard our words. We want to speak the truth in love. We want to speak to other people as we'd like to be spoken to. We'd like to speak to other people as they would like to be spoken to. And there is a time for boldness and a time for tenderness, and hopefully we can see the difference. The last point is there's a time to keep quiet. There's a time to keep quiet. That can be in a marriage. That can be in a school. That can be on the job. And it may actually be something that becomes a way of life. Now, I know some people don't like this verse because they think Christians should always speak up and speak loudly. Speak up and speak loudly and speak about Christ. And now, yes, there's a lot of times to speak up. A lot of times to speak up. But I'll tell you, the people the Christians over in China who are smuggling Bibles in have learned not to speak up. They've learned just to deliver the Bibles, to get the Bibles in people's hands. And some American Christians will say, well, I'd speak up no matter what. Well, then you'd be foolish. You wouldn't be like Christ. Christ did speak up, but most of the time, early in Christ's ministry, he kept quiet. And then later in his ministry, he spoke up. You know what happened when he spoke up? They killed him. So again, there's a time to speak up. And by the way, when you keep quiet, it's not because you're afraid. If you keep quiet, it's because you're being smart. So if someone says you're a coward because you don't speak up, don't even waste your breath arguing with them. Just know in your heart and your mind, if you keep quiet, it's because you're being smart. There's going to come a day where I'm going to stop doing Eye on the World. There's going to come a day because of this verse. There'll be a day when I'll continue to give sermons that are broadcast, but I'm real careful anyway with what I say. But again, I'll always want to be careful, and there may be days where I have to be more careful. Not because I'm afraid, but I want to be smart. Amos 5, verses 12 and 13. I know your manifold transgressions. I know your mighty sins. You afflict the just and you take bribes. You divert the poor from justice at the gate. And that's what's happening around us. Justice is a huge loss. Our judicial system's in a mess, and that's why there's a huge fight by politicians to try to get control of the judicial system. And that's why people didn't care about what the facts were, what the information was, or what the innocence was or was not. There's a big battle going on. Justice now, and there's an article in Eye on the World, certain elements of society have to get control of that Justice Department. The media, academia, and the Justice Department. The big three. If they can control the media, academia, and the Justice Department, that is a big feather in the cap of, I'll even say, the evil influence of the world. But there will come a time in your little life, there may come a time in your bigger life, when it says, therefore, because of all that injustice around you and the fighting and all the things going around you, the prudent will keep silent at that time, for it's an evil time. So if you choose to keep quiet, it's not because you're afraid. You may choose, say, there's a time that's good not to use the tongue. So a couple quick reminders. Please ask God to give you a change of heart. Please ask God to help you guard your words. Please speak the truth in love. Please speak to other people as you would like to be spoken to you. Please speak to other people as they would like to be spoken to. Remember, there's a time for boldness and a time for tenderness. Please understand the difference. And remember, there is a time and will be a time to keep quiet. Brethren, I wanted to share those 7 reminders about the tongue.